Indians were first brought over to Uganda by the British in the 1890s to build the Uganda Railway connecting Mombasa in Kenya to Kampala in Uganda. Around 40,000 Indians were brought as indentured workers on 3-year contracts, along with draftsmen, surveyors, accountants, clerks and supervisors, and many of them stayed on when the railway was completed. Traders and other professionals, seeking to make the most of new opportunities, soon followed. At the time, the British perhaps could not foresee how these laborers and traders would extend their influence beyond the construction of a railway. An industrious people, the Ugandan Indians eventually did that. With the promotion of the cash crops throughout Kenya and Uganda, Indian traders became ideally positioned to move into cotton trading because of their connections with Bombay's cotton industry. By 1919, Indians were buying and exporting half of Uganda's cotton crop to Bombay mills, and many others had established sugar plantations. The migrants also found other commercial opportunities and opened businesses and engaged in trade across the country. Although many of the original migrants had been men, later whole families moved from Indian regions of Punjab, Gujarat, Goa, etc. This early success of Indians is attributed to their capacity to work hard for long hours and to live modestly without comfort and ostentation. And memories of Indian life in Uganda often mention its rich sociability. This life was supported not only by the population's economic success, but by cultural, religious and social institutions that were established in Kampala, Jinja and other towns. Worship in temples and mosques, social gatherings and sports and cultural events gave a structure to everyday life. British colonial policy used the Indians as a buffer between Europeans and Africans, and Indians quickly established themselves in the middle rungs of government and other professions. This three-tier racial hierarchy concentrated Europeans, Indians and Africans in different parts of the economy, and aimed to separate them socially. Each group led almost separate lives, with residential and cultural mingling discouraged. The strategic intermediary position occupied by the Indian community ensured its economic eminence and personal enrichment, though it also posed a serious danger. By putting Asians in direct contact with Africans, this intermediary position made them more unpopular among the latter, while on the other hand, Europeans remained relatively distanced from the Africans. Thus it became easy for the Ugandan independence movements to position the Indians as a problem. They were the major target of the riots in 1945 and 1949. It resulted in many Indians acquiring British passports, and only a third of the Indians opted to take Ugandan citizenship on independence in 1962. Thus there is no doubt that the refusal by a large majority of Indians to acquire Ugandan citizenship increased their vulnerability at that time, creating a perception that they were not willing to belong to the new nation. Following the independence of East African countries in the 1960s, the new governments introduced africanization policies designed to end Asian dominance in the professions, civil services and commerce. Milton Obote's government in Uganda also pursued this policy by deliberately targeting Indians and barring them from holding civil service positions. A system of work permits and trade licenses was introduced in 1969 to restrict the role of non-citizen Indians in economic and professional activities. Alongside this kind of state action, anti-Indian prejudice sometimes spilled over into violence. Next President of Uganda, Idi Amin, accelerated this process, and in August 1971, he announced a review of the citizenship status awarded to Uganda's Indian community, accusing some of them of disloyalty, non-integration and commercial malpractice. On the 4th of August 1972, Amin declared that Britain would need to take on the responsibility of caring for British subjects of Indian origin. And a 3-month deadline till the 8th of November was given to the Indians to leave Uganda. The position of some 23,000 Indo-Ugandans who had already been granted the Ugandan citizenship was initially unclear, but soon they too were added to the list of the outgoers, before being re-exempted a few days later following international pressure. However, most chose to leave rather than endure further intimidation, with only a handful known to have stayed. Amin defended the expulsion by arguing that he was giving Uganda back to the ethnic Ugandans. His decrees drew immediate worldwide condemnation, including from India. The Indian government warned Uganda by stating that it would suffer dire consequences, but it took no action when Ugandan government ignored the ultimatum. Most of the Indians went to UK, and some to Canada and India amongst a few other countries. Britain, reluctant to expand its newly introduced immigration quota, resettled some immigrants to Falkland Islands. Kenya and Tanzania closed their borders with Uganda to prevent an influx of refugees. Many Indians were expelled with little more than the clothes they were wearing. The businesses, possessions and lands they left behind were confiscated to be redistributed to the African tenants. While the influence exerted by Indians on the national economy was a reality in independent Uganda, their mass expulsion was a political populist measure since it gave a section of the new regime's social class access to certain business activities. Before the expulsion of the Indians, they accounted for 90% of Ugandan tax revenues. This meant that in the years which followed, Uganda's economy slumped massively. The Indian impact in Uganda was huge, as can be stated by the fact that only a handful of the Indians that stayed behind still contributed to more than 30% in tax in 1985. The Indian migrants from Uganda and other East African countries faced racism and prejudice, which made it difficult for them to find accommodation and certain kinds of jobs. But rather than bewailing what they had lost, the Indians promptly set about restoring their fortunes, on the assumption that if they had to start from bottom, the only way was up. Over the years, they largely regained the prosperity they left behind in East Africa. Similarly, the ones who left for Canada are today prosperous and thriving as a community. When Yoweri Museveni seized power in Uganda in 1986, he encouraged the exiled Indians to return. Some returned back over the next decade, and even though today when they make up less than 1% of the population, they are estimated to contribute up to 65% of Uganda's tax revenues. The country's richest man, Sudhir Ruparelia, is an Indian, and similarly many of the influential and famous people in Uganda are of Indian descent. A big part of Uganda's business sector is controlled by Indians, and they are involved in a number of businesses including hotels, banking, manufacturing and retail. Having been present for centuries in Eastern Africa, Indians were used by the British as auxiliaries of the colonial system. They largely contributed to the success of the contemporary Ugandan economy while ensuring their own economic and social growth. Over the years, Indians have been asking Uganda to give them constitutional recognition, as recognizing the Indians as a Ugandan tribe might deepen their social integration and protect their businesses. Due to this, their integration into the Ugandan society is far from being accomplished, despite the cruel experience of expulsion in 1972. This objective, which determines the future of their relations with the Ugandan society at large, remains an important issue for Uganda in the near future. Or, will the Indians' economic success trigger a new racial clash?